The rain came down in cold, heavy sheets the morning Mara arrived at Draven Keep. She stood at the end of a small convoy of wolves from Pac Verith, her boots soaking through, her dark hair plastered flat against her cheeks. She did not shiver. She did not look up at the massive stone gates. She simply stood and waited, the way she had always waited, with a stillness that made people uncomfortable, though they could never explain why. King Chaol Draven stood at the top of the entrance steps with his arms folded and his expression blank. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of authority that made wolves drop their gaze without being told to. His beta commander, Ron, stood at his right, his war council spread out behind him like a shadow. Alpha Verith stepped forward and offered his terms. His pack needed military protection from a growing threat pressing in from the eastern border. He had no gold. He had no land to spare. So he offered what he considered expendable: the mute Omega girl he had acquired 2 years ago in a trade that had already cost him nothing. "She is a gift of goodwill," Verith said, gesturing toward Mara. "She comes without complaint. She works without stopping." One of the council members leaned toward another and whispered something. A low laugh passed between them. Chaol looked at Mara. Just looked, for a moment, the way a man might glance at something left on the side of a road. Then he spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone in the courtyard to hear. "What use is a wolf with no voice? She cannot even howl." More laughter. It bounced off the wet stone walls and disappeared into the rain. Mara did not flinch. She did not look up. She simply waited. Sale accepted Verith's terms because the eastern threat was real, and he needed the intelligence Verith carried, not because of anything she represented. He waved her off toward the servants' wing without another word. She was given a small chalkboard to communicate. She was given the coldest room. She was given the hardest work. And she got started. Nobody paid much attention to Mara in the weeks that followed. She moved through Draven Keep quietly, through the kitchens, the stables, the storage halls, and the staff learned to work around her the way you work around a piece of furniture you have stopped seeing. But Mara saw everything. She saw that the war maps in the council chamber had an error in the eastern trade route markings, a mistake small enough to overlook, but large enough to cost a patrol. She wrote it down on her chalkboard, walked to the council chamber door, and slid the board underneath. Nobody responded. 2 weeks later, the king's scouts returned and confirmed the error exactly as she had marked it. The council was puzzled. Chaol reviewed the report that evening in his private study and said nothing to anyone. Then she noticed that Commander Ran had been meeting with a messenger whose scent was masked, too clean, too carefully neutral, the way a trained spy covers himself. She sketched the symbol she had spotted on the messenger's ring and left the chalkboard outside the king's study door early one morning. By midday, Chaol had quietly placed Ron under observation. Within a week, he confirmed the messenger was a spy planted by a rival Alpha. Ran was removed from the inner circle. Chaol found himself watching for the chalkboard notes. He never told anyone. He simply watched, and whenever a small board appeared outside his study, he acted on it, and it was always right. He started watching her too. He noticed the way she moved through the keep, like something that belonged to itself. Unhurried, unafraid, present without drawing attention. He noticed that the horses that had resisted every skilled rider in his stables would stand completely calm beneath her hands. He watched from the high corridor window one evening as she pressed her forehead gently to the nose of the wildest one, and the animal went still like a held breath. He told himself he was observing a useful resource. He was a king. He was practical about these things. He almost believed it. The trouble with Alpha Thresh arrived on a Thursday. Thresh led Pack Ironhold, one of the more powerful regional packs, and he had the manners of a man who had never once been told no. He came to the keep to discuss border agreements and brought with him a loud confidence that filled every room he entered. During the formal evening meal, Thresh noticed Mara moving along the side of the hall with a water pitcher. He watched her for a moment, with a look that had no warmth in it, then called out across the table, "Is that the mute girl I have been hearing about?" The room shifted. Several heads turned. "Come here," Thresh said, with the flat authority of an Alpha addressing an Omega. By pack law, that kind of command from a higher-ranked wolf was not easy to refuse. Mara set down the pitcher and walked to the table. She stood quietly before him. Thresh studied her with theatrical curiosity. "Speak," he said. Silence. "That is an order." The room was very still now. Mara stood without moving, without looking afraid, without looking defiant either. She looked like water, like something that has no argument with the stone it flows around. Thresh reached across the table and picked up her chalkboard. He looked at it for a moment, then he snapped it in two over the edge of the table and dropped the pieces on the floor. "A wolf with no voice is a wolf without purpose," he said. "She should be put out of her misery. It would be a kindness." Kale sat at the head of the table. His jaw was tight. He let 2 full seconds pass, then turned the conversation sharply to border logistics. His tone left no room for argument. Thresh, noticing the king's attention, let the subject drop. It was not a rescue. Mara did not look at Kale as if it were. But later that night, Kale found himself walking to the stables. He told himself he was checking on one of the horses, the wild one. Mara was there, working by a single lantern, brushing the animal down in long, slow strokes. She did not look surprised to see him. She looked at him the way she looked at most things, like she was simply waiting for whatever came next. Kale leaned in the doorway and said quietly, almost before he meant to, "You should have flinched. Everyone flinches." She turned to look at him. Then she crouched and wrote in the thin layer of dust on the stable floor with her finger. "Flinching teaches them where to aim." He read it. He stood there for another moment. Then he walked back to the keep without a word and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling of his room, thinking about 7 words written in dust. The lorekeeper's name was Senna, and she had served Draven Keep for 40 years. She was the kind of old woman that people forgot was in the room until she spoke, and when she spoke, everyone listened. Senna had noticed Mara on the 2nd day. Not the way others noticed her, not with pity or dismissal. She noticed the energy around the girl, a kind of atmospheric stillness that she recognized from very old texts she had not read in decades. She went back to the deep archives. She read for 8 days straight. On the 9th night, she knocked on Kale's study door past midnight and placed a manuscript on his desk. The pages were old enough to be fragile. She told him to read the section she had marked. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair. The text described something called the voice bond. It was not a curse. It was not a defect. It was the original language of the wolf world, the sound from which all pack bonds had first been woven into existence, centuries before the Bloodright Compact, before packs had names or kings or borders. The person who carried it heard it always, felt it always, a constant vibration they carried in the bones of their chest. If they spoke it aloud, the resonance would travel through every pack bond on the continent simultaneously. It could heal what was broken. It could restore what was dying. But if the carrier lost control of it for even a moment, it could unravel pack bonds instead of reinforcing them, severing thousands of connections at once, leaving every wolf without anchor, without alpha, without the fundamental sense of belonging that pack bonds created. The carrier stayed silent by choice, always. Not because they had no voice, because they understood what their voice cost. Kale set the manuscript down and did not speak for a long time. He thought about a courtyard in the rain. He thought about the specific words he had said, loudly, in front of a crowd of wolves. He thought about a chalkboard snapped in two, and the person who had stood there without flinching. She had been carrying the most significant power in the history of their world, voluntarily and alone, for her entire life. She had protected every wolf on the continent from a strength she had never asked for and never used. And the first thing he had said to her was a joke. He got up and went to find her. She was in the archive room, reading by candlelight. She looked up when he entered, unsurprised. He sat across from her and placed the manuscript on the table between them. He watched her face as she looked at it. It did not change much. She turned the pages carefully, then closed it and rested her hands on the cover. He had been given a new chalkboard to bring her. He slid it across the table. She picked up the chalk. He asked how long she had known. She wrote, "Always." He asked if she was afraid of it. She wrote, "I am not afraid of the power. I am afraid of one bad day. One moment when the pain is too much and the discipline slips. That is the only thing I have ever been afraid of." He was quiet. Then he asked, What would have happened if she had spoken the night Thresh broke her chalkboard? She looked at the table for a moment before she wrote. Her hand was steady. She wrote, "Every wolf in that room would have been overwhelmed. Every pack on this continent would have felt something break or mend without knowing why. I did not know which way it would go, so I said nothing." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and for once, he did not look like a king. He looked like a man who had made a significant error and was only now understanding its size. He said, "You could have told someone. You could have used it to demand better treatment, a better position, anything." She looked at him directly. It was a steady, clear look, with nothing aggressive in it. She wrote slowly, and when she finished, she turned the board so he could read it. "Power used to demand recognition is not strength. It is insecurity wearing a crown." He felt it land somewhere in his chest. He thought she might be talking about more than herself. He said, "I mocked you in front of everyone on the day you arrived. I was wrong." She studied him for a moment. Then she wrote 2 words. "I know." Something between them shifted. Slow, quiet, and enormous. The Bondbreaker sickness arrived from the east 3 weeks later. It was not the rogue pack threat that Verith had originally warned about. It was something far older and far worse. A spiritual infection that spread from wolf to wolf through contact, severing pack bonds from the inside and driving wolves feral. It had already swallowed 3 small packs entirely. It was moving north toward the larger territories, and nothing Kale's armies had tried could stop it. You could not fight a Bondbreaker spread with swords. It was not a physical wound. Every soldier who made contact with an infected wolf risked contracting it. The feral wolves could not be reasoned with. The infection simply spread, and kept spreading. Senna went back to the archives. She read faster than she had ever read in 40 years of service. The answer was the same in every text. The only recorded counter to a Bondbreaker spread was the voice bond, used deliberately and with precision to flood the existing pack bonds with so much resonant strength that the infection had nothing left to sever. But no carrier had ever used it. There was no recorded guide. There was no promise of success. Kale came to Mara, and he told her everything. He spread the maps on the table and showed her the spread, the rate, the projections. He told her what Senna had found. He told her that he did not know if it would work. He told her that he did not know what it would cost her. Then he stepped back and said, "It is your decision, entirely yours. I am not ordering this. I am not asking as your king." She looked at the maps for a long time. Then she picked up her chalk. She wrote, "I need 3 days." He gave her 3 days and everything else she asked for. On the 3rd morning, Mara stood at the edge of the high cliff above the Marrow Sea. The infected zone spread below and outward along the coast. Kale stood beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside her. His army stood back in silence. Senna stood nearby with her hands clasped, her lips moving quietly. Mara closed her eyes. She breathed slowly, the way she had been practicing for 3 days, finding the center of the sound that lived in her chest, learning the edges of it, understanding where it began and where it wanted to go. Then she opened her mouth. What came out was not a howl. It was not a word in any language that anyone present could name. It was something beneath language, something that predated every word any wolf had ever spoken. It was the sound the bond between packmates makes in the quietest moments of trust, when no one is watching and no one is performing, and 2 wolves simply exist beside each other in peace. That sound, multiplied beyond counting. The effect moved outward like light. The feral wolves along the coast stopped moving. The wild, fractured look in their eyes flickered. The Bondbreaker infection, which worked by finding the thread between packmates and pulling it apart, hit the resonance like a wave hitting a solid wall. It did not break through. It dissolved. The sound kept spreading. Every wolf on the continent felt it. In the middle of hunts and meals and arguments and sleep, every wolf went completely still for 7 seconds as the resonance moved through them. Broken bonds ached and then eased. Old wounds between packs that had festered for years suddenly felt smaller and further away. Wolves who had been drifting toward isolation for reasons that had nothing to do with any infection felt something reconnect inside them, like a light coming back on in a room they had forgotten was dark. It lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then it stopped. Mara swayed. Cale caught her before she could fall. She was shaking and pale and exhausted in a way that went deeper than the body, a tiredness of the soul, the kind that comes from finally releasing something you have been holding for a very long time. But she was whole. He held her carefully and said nothing. She rested her forehead against his shoulder and let herself be still. For once, he did not need words either. In the weeks that followed, reports came in from across the continent. The infection was gone. The feral wolves were recovering. Pack bonds were measurably stronger in territories that had shown no sign of infection at all. Scholars and healers reported things they had no framework to explain. Feuds between packs dissolving without negotiation, long-severed bonds spontaneously mending, wolves returning home after years away, drawn by something they felt rather than understood. Cale called a full assembly of alphas. He stood before every regional leader in Veldrath and told them what had happened. He told them what Mara was. He told them what she had carried alone for 23 years. He told them, clearly, and without softening it, what he had said to her in a courtyard in the rain on the day she arrived. Then he turned to her. He asked, in front of all of them, if she would remain at Draven Keep. He got as far as, I am asking you to stay, not as a servant, not as an Omega, but as, and then he stopped, because he was a king and kings are, as a general rule, not practiced at this kind of sentence. Mara picked up her chalkboard. She wrote on it and held it up so the entire assembly could read it. Ask me properly. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the room, because every alpha present had just watched the most powerful ruler in the wolf world get quietly and patiently corrected by the woman he had once dismissed as useless. Cale held her gaze for a moment, then he went down on one knee. She wrote yes. 6 months later, Mara still used the chalkboard sometimes. She told Cale once, when he raised an eyebrow at it, that old habits were slow to leave. But in the evenings, when the keep was quiet and the fire had burned low, and there was no one else in the room, she spoke to him, small things mostly, observations she had saved up during the day, questions about the maps. The occasional dry remark that made him laugh out loud in a way his counsel had never once heard from him. He never described her voice to anyone who asked. Some things belonged to the quiet. Some things were only for the person who had finally, after a great deal of stumbling, learned how to listen.